Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us online. Welcome to New Lines Institute's panel discussion called The Abraham Accords After the Gaza Deal, Promise, Pitfalls, and Policy Shifts. My name is Claudia Vlachevich-Lusinski. I'm a senior fellow at New Lines Institute, and I will be moderating today's discussion and conversation. I think that we're gathered here at a very pivotal moment for Middle Eastern diplomacy. 5 years have passed since the signing of the Abraham Accords. The region faces renewed questions about stability and opportunity following the recent Gaza deal. President Trump's renewed engagement and Washington's diplomatic energy have placed the Accords once again in the center of debate and attention. Whether they can pave the way for a broader regional normalization, including possible inclusion of Saudi Arabia, or whether unresolved issues, especially around Palestinian inclusion, remain significant obstacles. Our goal today is to sort of explore these questions through three very complementary perspectives: strategic, critical, and regional. And each of our panelists brings exceptional insight and experience to this discussion. So without further ado, with us, there are here Dr. Ilan Scialom from Paris. I think you're in Paris, I'm correct. We just talked about it. He's the director of strategy at Zalis and the founder of the European Observatory of the Abraham Accords. His work focuses on strategic realignment in the Middle East, cybersecurity, which is really important, and the diplomacy of functional cooperation, I would say. There's my colleague, Rachel Nelson, in Washington, D.C. She's a New Lines analyst, where she examines, among other things, the moral and political trade-offs of normalization, exploring whether peace without justice can ever be sustainable. And I'm very happy to welcome Samer Sinijlawi from East Jerusalem. Are you currently in East Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
A Palestinian political activist and chairman of the Jerusalem Development Fund, known for his advocacy and inclusive work and regarding governance and pragmatic reform within Palestinian and regional political systems. I would just like to remind everyone, including our public here, that the roundtable will run for about 60 minutes, beginning with individual questions for each panelist, each question followed by cross-cutting discussion, and the last 10 to 15 minutes for audience engagement. So if everyone's ready, I would like to start maybe with Ilan in this particular case. I've written down the questions, so please don't hold that against me because I want it to be very precise in what I'm asking. My question to you, 5 years on from their signing, do the Abraham Accords remain resilient in the wake of the Gaza deal, or have renewed conflicts and domestic pressures exposed their fragility more than ever?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be with you this morning or tonight in Paris. Well, to answer your question, I will say that the short answer is they've survived, but they've changed nature. So the Abraham Accords are no longer a peace project. They've become a security and resilience framework. They endure two wars, one Israel and Hamas, and the other one Israel and Iran. So at the same time, waves of anti-normalization protests and even the moral earthquake of Gaza, not because they inspire hearts, but because they serve hard interests. Just to give a figure, trade between Israel and the UAE had crossed $4.6 billion. Defense and energy projects are expanding. And with Morocco, if we take just the Maghreb geographical area, with Morocco, we have over than 20 bilateral agreements between Israel and Morocco since 2021. So this shows institutional depth. They are not just photo operation. So, but let's be very honest. Public legitimacy has collapsed across the region. The peace without Palestine narrative is bankrupt. And for many citizens, normalization now feels like moral detachment. Governments manage it quietly, away from headlines. So we are entering in what I call Abraham Accords 2.0, not a sequel, but a recalibration. After 5 years, enough trust exists among states to address what version 1.0 ignored, meaning the Palestinian question. So not out of sentiment, but out of strategic necessity. You can't stabilize regional economies while Gaza keeps burning every 2 years. So in that sense, Gaza is not the end of the accords, it's their test of maturity. And if this framework can evolve from transactional normalization to, I will say, conditional inclusion, it might finally become sustainable. So the Abraham Accords survived the war, but now they must survive relevance.
Rachel, if you would like, I would love you to chime in here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we've seen that the Abraham Accords, obviously they've survived the Gaza war, even though, I mean, recently the UAE did threaten to end its treaty with Israel over threats of annexation of the West Bank, which, if we remember from 2020, the UAE only ever signed its treaty with Israel because Israel disavowed any that it was going to annex the West Bank to begin with. Of course, soon after it began to produce this rhetoric once again. However, I don't really see that the Abraham Accords are likely to expand at this point. Of course, with the Gaza deal, if it does end up going through, I think it's even maybe a little bit premature to call it a Gaza deal. So far, we really only have a ceasefire and a hostage exchange. But if the Gaza deal goes as planned with Trump's 20-point plan, which includes an Arab army occupation or patrolling of Gaza, of course, then these states do in some way are recognizing or normalizing in some kind of sense with Israel. Maybe it's not the normalization we see between Morocco, Israel, and the UAE, where their societies, while they've never been at war, have semi-normalized. There's tourism and trade agreements, but I see it more being like maybe the agreements that we have with Egypt, that Israel has with Egypt and Jordan, where their populations have never normalized, but they have some kind of peace, they have some kind of agreement. But I don't see the Abraham Accords at this stage expanding. I think what we've seen is that what was an attempt to maybe, sure, it was trade agreements, and those have been successful, but any attempt for Israel to moderate or integrate into the region, we haven't seen that happen. And I think normalizing ahead of any kind of solution to the Palestine question only saw Israel become more hardline and aggressive. It got exactly what it wanted without dealing with the massive regional question, which is what is going to happen with a Palestinian state.
Thank you so very much, Samir. Before I ask you a question, because the next one is for you, would you like to share your thoughts?
Well, I think the Abrahamic Accords, or in general, all the peace accords between the Arab countries, including Jordan and Egypt, withhold it strongly during very tough 2 years. While, some other parts of the world, it showed that they cannot really continue withholding normalization with Israel. I mean, the ties between Israel and the rest of the world were affected when United Airlines, Delta, and Lufthansa and British Airways stopped flying to Israel. The Emirati Airlines quadrupled their flights from 4 to 16 and 17 flights a day between Tel Aviv and Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And Ilan mentioned the 4. I know that it's around 4.3, but I guess it grew a little bit, 4.5, 4.6 billion trade. This is massive. But what I can tell you, I can draw similarities between October 23 and October 25. And I'll tell you why is this related to the Abraham Accords. In 2023, there was enough information about the plans of Hamas. Sinwar was going publicly speaking about his plans. Israel knew that there are tunnels and there is military industry that is developing, drilling. Even that night, they saw the pickups and they saw the Israeli SIM cards that were, activated. I mean, there was a lot of information, but there was a lack of imagination. The Israelis couldn't imagine that Hamas can do it. Today, when there is a lot of indication that the power of Israel comes from its regional relation, we have seen this during the war. We have seen this today when everybody in the region is enthusiastic to start normalization with Israel, to integrate Israel. Everybody is speaking, heads of states. There is a lot of indications. Still, the Israelis, they lack the imagination that they belong to the Middle East. Still, the Israelis, they are so sorry that Wafa is threatening them to not to participate in the coming football games, or when the Eurovision is not welcoming them this year. The Israelis, they need to stop feeling part of Europe. They need to start imagining themselves as part of the Middle East. They need to start imagining them that they will able to play football in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Cairo, in Beirut, in Damascus, and to come to the Arab Idol instead of the Eurovision. So lack of imagination is the threat to the Abraham Accord. I'll give you one scene that is very disappointing for me and maybe for all the Abrahamic countries who have signed the Abrahamic Accords. On Sharm el-Sheikh ceremony some days ago, Emirates was not part of the signatories. Morocco wasn't part of the signatories. The Americans decided to bring Turkey and Qatar back to stays. And this is very disappointing. Emirates invested 1.8 billion in humanitarian aid in Gaza. Dermer met Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed around 20 years during the war, 20 times during the war. And still, when the Americans decide the partners for such a process of ending the war, they pick up the Qataris and the Turkish. As Palestinians, especially those Palestinians in Gaza, during the war, we started thanking God that Abraham Accords was before the 7th of October, because it's almost rescued Gaza from starvation. If the Emiratis didn't have this warm diplomatic relation with Israel, they couldn't do what they have been doing to Gaza. The big operation of water, all the drinkable water that comes to Gaza comes from desalination plant that the Emiratis have built. The Emirati field hospital, the humanitarian aid, the airdrop, all this process. So in a way or another, somebody is betraying the Abraham Accords. Maybe those who have created it, Trump and Bibi.
So just to skip straight to this question that I had for you, from a regional perspective, do you sense that the Arab states still view the accords as strategically useful? That's what I would want to ask you.
Well, definitely it is strategically useful. It is strategically useful because we are fed up, we are tired. The Arabs, there is a process of de-radicalization in the Arab world. You see the process that MBS is pushing in Saudi Arabia. This transformation to modernity and to moderate in Saudi Arabia is a huge change. At the same time, look at Israel. It's the opposite. It's a radicalization process. So the energy, the dynamics in the region is pro-integration, pro-integration, is pro-normalization, is pro-security arrangements, is pro-peace and security and justice for Palestinians. This is the trend, including all the needs of Israel, including securing and recognizing Israel as a Jewish democratic state, including putting a strategy, a regional strategy that puts in its basis the security needs of the Israelis and Israel. So there is a necessity, there is a need, and it's sincere. I think it's sincere, and it's coming from the people who are leading the Middle East now. But somebody needs to pick up this message. So I think what we missed here, and maybe the one mistake that the Abraham Accord has really fell into, is that they focused a lot into economies, but they did not focus on the psychology. It's like now everybody is talking about the reconstruction of Gaza, but nobody is talking about the reconciliation that we need, Israelis and Palestinians. The peace does not, you cannot build peace by steel and concrete. You need to build peace by defeating the hard feelings that most of Israelis and Palestinians have to each other. So this element have been missed in the Abrahamic Accord. And I think now even those who are engineering the new peace dynamics are also missing that the international community or the partners in any peace agreement should invest into reconciliation before reconstruction.
Just super briefly so that we make it full circle, Ilan, if you have something to say, super short.
Very, very shortly, just to come back about the question of reconstruction and maybe pragmatic calculation by the Gulf states regarding the Gaza plan. I will say that the capitals right now that are engaged, committed through the Abraham Accords, they are always pragmatic. And the reconstruction track provides just enough leverage to shift calculation, but only if the package is carefully calibrated. Just remind that the Gulf states face domestic pressures, regional rivalries with Iran, and reputational risk as well. So reconstruction offers a lower risk entry into a deeper coordination, but only up to a point. I will say that Gulf capital, and I agree about the idea of reconciliation, but the Gulf capital don't commit to dreams. They commit to calibrated risk. And Gaza, in that sense, can be that calibration if it's structured as a test and not a leap of faith.
Thank you. The next one is for Rachel. Many see the so-called Gaza deal, but I agree with what you said about it earlier, as a potential bridge towards regional stabilization, as we just talked about it a little bit. But does placing reconstruction at the center risks substituting humanitarian progress for genuine political inclusion? What are your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think the Abraham Accords were built on a model that, and as many of us have said, completely excluded any kind of centering of the Palestine question, which is really at the center of the region. It's really at the center of the hearts and minds of like the citizens of the region, maybe not most of the Gulf country governments, but the people. But that's kind of what has played out over the years is that normalization, which a lot of these Gulf countries, or at least the UAE, thought would maybe moderate Israel or incentivize them to have a peace process because they would finally become integrated into the region and therefore would have incentives from these partners to actually work towards peace. But we've seen the opposite, actually. We've seen intensified settlement expansion, escalated settler violence. There's been aggressive rhetoric against a Palestinian state, and there's been massive catastrophic military action in Gaza, which has killed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of civilians. And that's all while these, signed countries have really just watched from the sidelines. So obviously reconstruction of Gaza, the entry of humanitarian aid, dealing reconciliation, as Summer said, just the humanitarian toll on the people who are struggling to survive still. I mean, we are not out of the brink of humanitarian disaster. That is obviously what is most important at the moment. But when it comes to the Gaza deal and it comes to, or potential Gaza deal, and it comes to any kind of expansion of any Abraham Accords like framework, it has to address the root cause of the conflict. But if this Gaza deal follows that same pattern as the Abraham Accords, which really just prioritizes regional diplomacy over meaningful political progress towards a Palestinian state, or even just a more peaceful environment on the ground. I mean, the West Bank is also on fire, as most people like to forget. East Jerusalem is being annexed. People are being evicted from homes. This is what we also have to address with any kind of expanded agreements with Arab countries. But without addressing these core injustices, so the denial of Palestinian self-determination, ongoing occupation and violence, without centering that, the normalization with these countries risks kind of what we've already seen, that there's no incentive from Israel to keep the promises that it makes, like with the UAE, that they wouldn't annex the West Bank. Now we're seeing the E1 settlement plan. So if there's no incentives, then that it just kind of falls apart. So I do think that normalization without addressing these causes first, without addressing a two-state solution, without a real international framework for moving towards a Palestinian state, normalization just risks the cycle that we've seen before.
I can actually jump straight to Samir with this next question, and then he can sort of carry on with what Rachel was saying. Do you believe in the future expansion of the Accords, perhaps including Saudi Arabia, can ever be legitimate without visible progress on Palestinian governance, liberty, and representation?
Well, I think we have heard the Saudi position so clearly several times. You know, the Saudis don't talk a lot, but when they talk, they mean what they say. And they say it's conditioned to a Palestinian state. Now it's not to a path or to a Palestinian component or a path to two states. It's two states full stop. And I think it can be more clear than this. I can understand that this is a position that is mainly a reaction towards a lot of internal issues. Also, the Saudis, they have internal issues. It doesn't mean that, a political system that is a monarchy does not have its own challenges locally. They have their own challenges, even at the top of the pyramid inside the royal family itself. So this is, I don't think that for the leadership of Saudi Arabia, they have a lot of margin to maneuver here. So I can't see any chance of development if the Palestinian issue remains as is. And I think it's time now. It's time because we have good dynamics. When President Trump has pushed the ceasefire, it resulted in two things. Now we have gladly received back the last Israeli hostages from Gaza. And I'm really very happy for the families who got back their beloved ones. But the big question that still remains on the table, when will the last Israeli soldier leave Gaza? And this is the real challenge here. The ceasefire also has created what is called the yellow line. Now, between the yellow line and the green line, it's a long story. Everybody now is waiting for a withdrawal to the green line. You know, this is the expectation of the whole region, to be able to go full speed in a complete, comprehensive, unconditional cooperation and integration and normalization with Israel. So these are serious challenges. I am not sure that President Trump is capable to push more. I think he knows that we have reached to a limit with the current prime minister in Israel. And he knows that we might need to wait a little bit to see the internal dynamics in Israel, whether there will be early elections or whether the elections will continue to be as scheduled next October 2026. Anyhow, we are now one Israeli election away from comprehensive normalization and peace in the Middle East. We'll see if the Israelis will go to the election boxes, whether on time in October or earlier or sooner. They will go and will vote for a coalition that will pick up this direction, or they are still, you know, a little bit of under trauma and hesitation, and they prefer to be a little bit conservative and maintain the status quo. So this is a big test, and I think we need, especially we, the Palestinians, we need to see if in the coming months we can do something to relax a little bit the Israeli voter. If we can deliver such a message that will be so powerful that it can change a little bit some minds and hearts of the Israelis. All we need is to convince another 300, 400,000 Jewish voters to vote differently in the coming elections, and to a little bit try to motivate the Arab voters in Israel to increase their participation from 40% to 70%. I'm sorry to put all the dynamics, all the future of the Middle East on a simple calculation of 300, 400,000 votes, but this is how it is. If the Israelis are not convinced in peace, we will never have peace in the Middle East. So we need to see how we can be creative into doing something that can change the hearts and the minds of the Israelis.
Ilan, back to you. A lot has been said by Samer and Rachel. We would love to hear your thoughts.
Just to come back on the what has been said by Samer about the potential expansion of the accords, and especially Saudi Arabia, and as well, it's a way to answer to Rachel as well. I think Gaza reconstruction is now the region new diplomatic currency, and everyone knows it. I mean, UN, EU, the World Bank, they are estimating 53 billion needed over 10 years. Some talk about 70 billion of dollars. So no country can handle that alone. That's why Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Cairo, and even Amman are watching carefully. So for Saudi Arabia, this is both a moment of leverage and a risk of entrapment. So we know the condition for the kingdom. I mean, they are very clear. U.S. defense guarantee. I don't know if you see it, but the Financial Times talked today about a new defense pact between KSA and the U.S. This is the first condition. A monitored civilian nuclear program, and the third one is a credible state political reason for the Palestinians. So if Gaza reconstruction becomes just a donor exercise under Western supervision, normalization will stall. But if it becomes a shared regional project where Gulf capital, Israeli expertise, and Palestinian participation coexist under international oversight, that's what I call Abraham Accords 2.0. That said, I think that we must stay pragmatic. Everything changed very, very fast and very, very quickly in this region. So money alone cannot sanitize a political vacuum. The day crime appears in Gaza while governance remains unresolved. So public anger will return, and with it, sabotage and instability. So the opportunity is real, and I agree with Samer, but fragile. So the accords can expand only if Palestinian agency is restored, not replaced. So yeah, you can rebuild walls, but without rebuilding credibility, they'll crumble again.
Thank you so much. Rachel, before I ask you a question, anything you'd like to add?
Nope, I'm ready for your question.
Okay, so you described normalization as somewhat of a diplomatic illusion. Now let's switch to the US perspective a little bit. Do recent policy moves from Washington genuinely address underlying justice concerns, or do they again prioritize elite stability over moral consistency?
Sure. Yeah, I will say the political conversation in Washington remains very heavily skewed towards short-term crisis management and diplomatic optics. So definitely not justice or inclusion. We've obviously seen President Trump, he's a very charismatic guy, and he's talked a lot about the suffering in Gaza, which has been quite shocking. But at the same time, there's been very little Palestinian inclusion. I mean, we saw the Palestinian Authority's visas revoked ahead of the UN General Assembly here in New York. So yes, while there is this 20-point plan and it does indicate some kind of Palestinian Authority reform and then governance in Gaza, Israel has made it pretty clear that it's not open to that. And so I'm not really sure if there's actually a path to achieving that. And this administration, like it does in many other conflicts around the world, is very keen to tell what it thinks should happen and what it thinks it can make happen. But we've seen time and time again between Israel and the Palestinians that obviously doesn't usually work. And so I think that this administration will have to reckon with the fact that there are a lot of moving parts in this Gaza deal that have been expressed as maybe not happening. I see it very unlikely that Hamas decides it's going to disarm. I find it unlikely that Israel is going to allow for an Arab army occupation of Gaza and not be involved in any of that security inside. And I find it very unlikely that Israel is going to work towards the 20th point of that 20-point plan, which is a future Palestinian state or self-determination for Palestinians. So I really do think that this administration is not keen to include a Palestinian voice. in any kind of again, this administration is big on the money, right? Has very heavily invested in these Gulf countries. It has massive military industrial defense deals with these countries. And to Trump, the Abraham Accords were not a move to bring peace between Israel and the Palestinians. It was purely for the economic engagement between these countries, which it saw as something that would be really great, which obviously with Ilan and Samar's points, like they have churned out like massive economic progress. But these Abraham Accords were not built to bring peace between Israel and the Palestinians, and I see that as something that the administration doesn't have on the docket to expand the Accords. They will not have any kind of Palestinian inclusion. They are, again, skewed towards diplomatic optics and, again, economic progress in the region.
Samir, what is your perspective on this?
Well, the issue of a Palestinian agency is very important. And I think this is mainly a Palestinian failure. The absence of the Palestinian leadership. Actually, this leadership, some people like to call it that it was on a silent mood. I say they were in a deep sleep mood during the war. And maybe President Abbas was shocked when he arrived to Sharm el-Sheikh. He was not in the official invitees list. I mean, this was an American event. The invitation went from and signed by President Trump. Egypt was just hosting the event, so the American protocol was taking care of everything. But when Trump informed the Egyptians that he might bring Bibi, the Egyptians invited Abbas. When Abbas arrived to the scene, he did not find a Palestinian flag. If you look at the flags, all the flags were there except of the Palestinian flag. And then when they started calling for leaders to go to the stage and have a photo opportunity with President Trump, his name was not in the list. And I guess when Macron was having this chat with President Trump, it was about Abbas, and then he was forced to take him from his hand and penetrate the protocol and get him into stage to, avoid a very huge embarrassment for a guy that is 90 years old. But also at the signing ceremony, there was no chair for Abbas. He was not among those leaders who were sitting behind the four signatories on the declaration. So it was a very embarrassing, even when he was in Sharm el-Sheikh, he was officially not invited. But his presence was to avoid, embarrassment of having Bibi and not having the Palestinians. Anyhow, this is a Palestinian problem. And it's mainly because everybody is trying to avoid the Palestinian elections. There is no reform. This kind of political theater that, some Europeans would like to mention it, praising Abbas that he has appointed a new prime minister. What is the difference between Muhammad Shtaya and Muhammad Mustafa? He took off one Muhammad and he brought another Muhammad, another puppet. What is the difference between, appointing a vice president from the same corrupted cronies? I mean, adding another title in the PA, is this a reform step? Appointing the new heads of the Palestinian security agencies from the personal bodyguards of the president. Is this a reform step, for God's sake? And then this exercise of trying to fix the educational system and the curriculum. Okay, fine. This current leadership can change the books, but I'll tell you something, and quote me on this. They will never be able to control the discussion in the classroom, because you cannot force something by only changing textbooks. You need to start changing the Palestinian narrative. You need to start recognizing the right of the Jewish people to exist in this land. It's not a might, it's a right. If they are weak, they are strong, it doesn't matter. We need to start educating our people in a culture of coexistence. And it starts by changing the narrative, changing the political language that we are using. And this Palestinian leadership is not capable to do anything of this. So we need to be smart. We need to understand that the cornerstone for any development in the region is Palestinian elections, and we need to allow it. We need to take this risk, even if some people are hesitating that maybe we learned something from 2006. Hamas is still strong. Hamas is not strong. Hamas lost all its popularity in Gaza. Zero popularity in Gaza. And Gaza is 40% of the voting power in any Palestinian election. It's time for Palestinian election because Palestinian election will do two things. First of all, it will defeat Hamas, something that the Israelis couldn't do it on a military base, because no military operation can defeat such a structure of militia in a complicated situation like Gaza. The only way to defeat Hamas is Palestinian election. And then we will create agency. We will, I'm definitely confident there will be, of course, Abbas will lose the election. Hamas will lose the election because the Palestinians are fed up from two things. They are fed up from the destruction that Hamas brought upon them in Gaza, and they are fed up from the corruption that Abbas brought upon them in the West Bank. They will create a new way, new leaders that will understand the importance of focusing on convincing the Israelis instead of convincing the whole world. This political theater of getting more states recognizing the state of Palestine, symbolically, it's good. I'm happy as a Palestinian. Will this change my reality? The only state we need to convince to recognize the state of Palestine is the state of Israel. And we need to focus in talking to the Israeli in every neighborhood, in the Rishon LeZion, in Tel Aviv, in Zichron Yaakov, in Haifa, instead of talking to the G7 or the United Nations General Assembly. All these changes together, starting changing the narrative. Also, very important message for the Israelis, if we would like to touch their hearts and minds. We need to redefine the right of return. The right of return needs to be redefined to read as the right of return to the Palestinian state and not to the state of Israel. Why would Israel accept a two-state solution and to withdraw from Gaza and the West Bank if they are not trying to rescue a Jewish democratic state? If I want to flood Israel with 5-6 million Palestinian refugees, I am then destroying this cause, this need, this just need for the Jewish people to live in a Jewish democratic state. So we need to introduce something from the roots of the problem. This change is very important to create new dynamics between Israelis and Palestinians. When Israelis and Palestinians decide to salvage the two-state, no power in the world will tell them that it's not time to solve the Palestinian question. And no power will tell them that you cannot be included in any process, including expansion of the Abrahamic Accord. The Abrahamic Accord, it's meaningless. If Saudis sign alone with Israel, without the Palestinians, it will change nothing. But when Saudis and Palestinians will sign on the same day with Israel, for me, this should be, the Israelis should change their date of independence from the 15th of May to the date they sign with the Israelis and Palestinians, because it's on that date Israel will be fully integrated in the Middle East, fully normalizing its relation with all the Arab and Muslim world and the region, and this will change the lives of Palestinians and Israelis for generations.
Ilan, I'm fairly certain that you have some thoughts to share on all of this before I ask you my next question.
Yes, very, very quickly, just to come back on what has been said by Rachel regarding diplomatic illusion. I think she's right to warn against the illusion, but it calls something else, a selective memory. The first wave of the Abraham Accords built a framework for coexistence, but it deliberately avoided the root of the conflict. It built bridge above the fault lines without stabilizing the ground beneath. And the result was predictable. When Gaza exploded, the illusion cracked, not because the idea of normalization was false, but because it was incomplete. We cannot build sustainable peace on historical denial. The region doesn't need another photo op of handshakes. It needs a process, and I agree with Samer, that confront the very origin of the fracture: displacement, identity, sovereignty, dignity. That's what this new version or this this upgrade of the Abraham Accords must be about using 5 years of pragmatic trust to return to the roots, not the rhetoric to reopen the political space that's been frozen since Oslo process, with Arab states now as active stakeholders rather than distant observers. And going back to the roots doesn't mean relitigating the past. It means restoring the context, understanding that without addressing the historical drivers of mistrust, every reconstruction plan is just a temporary truce. And this is a truce right now. It's not something else. So the illusion was thinking that we could jump to the end of history. And this new upgrade means daring to go back to its beginning, this time together, Israelis and Palestinians, with the help of these new actors that has been gathered through the Abraham Accords.
You've already brushed upon slightly the question that I want to ask you. I just want to see if Rachel has something to add to all of this.
Yeah, I think Summer made some great points. I think obviously right now recognition is important, and I think ultimately normalization will come naturally with actual movement towards Palestinian dignity, sovereignty. But I'm unconvinced that Israel will ever recognize a Palestinian state with the current government that they have and the way that things are moving in terms of the political ideology of the majority of its citizens. I think obviously that that realigning the ideology in Palestine is also important. But I do deeply think that, Israel is the one that holds all the power in this scenario, and they also are in deep need of an ideological reckoning and deep reconnection and reconciliation with Palestinians, especially with what is going on in the West Bank. I think that those causes need to be addressed before anything can even be addressed in terms of any kind of Gaza Deal, Abraham Accords, or treaty with a Palestinian state.
Thank you so much. As I said, Ilan, we sort of opened this can of worms a little bit, but let me ask you, you've mentioned and written about in your research about functional peace. In practical terms, has the new focus on this cooperative reconstruction projects has it reinforced this concept or has it made it more superficial?
Maybe explain to the viewers and what is exactly functional peace very quickly. This is the belief that cooperation on concrete issues can precede political trust. And this is the DNA of the Abraham Accords. It's not just accords because they have the same or a common denominator with Iran. It's also one of the reasons is the need of the Israeli skills, research in technology, because the new business model of the Gulf states, they really need Israeli expertise and US expertise as well. But Gaza has proven both that the functional peace, the strength of this idea and its weakness, meaning that it works technically. During the war, coordination between Israel, Egypt, and the UAE on humanitarian corridors, they never fully broke down. That's impressive. It means states have learned to cooperate pragmatically, even amid chaos. But the moral cost is rising. Functional peace works when conflicts are frozen. And now, when they are you see it in the TV in real time, Gaza repoliticized normalization. It reminded us that economies can be neutral when empathy becomes strategic. So yet here is the paradox. Precisely because trust has accumulated, this model can now evolve. Functional peace must become a functional responsibility, where cooperation is not about just only about stability, but about accountability. And that's the spirit of this upgrade, not abandoning functionalism, but upgrading it, linking logistics to legitimacy. Reconstruction, if governed transparently and inclusively in Gaza, could be the first real test of that evolution. So the functional peace, I will say, build bridges, but now it must carry the weight of conscience.
Samer, something you would like to add to this?
Well, I think it's very hard for us to be able to realize the level of destruction that has been, passing over Gaza. But I think we need to also work a little bit hard on trying as soon as possible to push Israelis and Palestinians out of trauma. We should not exaggerate on the trauma until I watch some local TV channels, and there are some media outlets that keep us a lot until now on the 7th of October. We need to heal our wounds. We need to say that's it. I mean, we reached to a stage where 7 October ended. When the last hostages left Gaza, it ended, and we need to believe it ended. We cannot stay there a lot. I focus on in the dynamics of the personal psychology of each Palestinian and Israeli. We Palestinians, we need also to heal our wounds. It's very hard. We paid a very hard price. And trust me, most of those who paid the price in Gaza are not related to Hamas. They are equal hostages of the other 260 Israeli hostages. Almost everybody in Gaza was hostages in the bunkers of Hamas, and they were victims of Hamas. We paid a heavy price. The Israelis paid a heavy price. It's time to turn the page. We need to heal the wounds very quickly and start thinking about how we can move on. We've learned something from this war. When it ended, we discovered that nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. We are still not, the Palestinians did not leave, the Israelis did not leave. We are still 7 million Israelis, 7 million Palestinians living in the same land. Nothing has changed at all. So maybe it's time to go into a path of peace of no choice.
Samira, let me ask you a question now that I have you right here speaking. If major Arab states were to rejoin or expand normalization post-war in Gaza, what tangible changes would Palestinians need to see for such arrangements to be viewed as legitimate rather than imposed?
Well, first of all, Palestinians should be given the opportunity to have their own election. This is the cornerstone. And then I think there should be a lot of work into trying to get back the situation to normality in Gaza. And the Palestinians, without seeing a real future that include, this conflict is two words. From the Israeli side is security, from the Palestinian side is self-determination. Nothing can compensate the Israelis on full security, and nothing can compensate the Palestinians on full self-determination. We should be able to reach to equation that supplies Israeli 100% security and supplies Palestinian 100% self-determination. It's as simple as this.
Thank you very much. Rachel, is there something you would like to add? Ilan?
Yeah, just to say that I completely agree with Samer. I'm a geopolitician, but beyond geopolitics, I think that we are dealing with a collective trauma on both sides. And this generation and the next generation are shaped by fear, loss, and mistrust. So Israeli carry the trauma of existential threats. Palestinians carry the trauma of dispossession and despair. And both narratives are real, and both are deeply human. And if you want peace that exists, I will not say that last because we are not now in peace moment, but I think we must move from negotiating interest to acknowledging the pain of everyone. And that means understanding not just national psychology, but personal wounds, how grief, insecurity, and humiliation shape identity and politics. So the next stage of diplomacy must make space for that complexity, not through speeches, but through rebuilding the very capacity to listen. And the political courage today is not about forgetting the trauma, but about refusing to be defined by it. And it's a very, very long, I will say, pathway before arriving to that moment. This trauma, they are not very, you don't see it by through TV. You see explosion, you see many physical damages, but inside damages, which are shaping identity for the next generation, this is a very, very important issue that we need to address.
Thank you very much. I'd like to urge all of our members of the audience to join in the Q&A. You can type. I'm sure that everyone has the option. In the meantime, we have a question for Mr. Samer. When you say that Palestinians should hold their own elections to replace Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas, who would be the alternative? Is there currently someone who can step up to work towards the objectives that you mentioned?
Well, we don't need to look for a savior on the Palestinian side. It's always discussing names, a name. Okay, I think with the end of the regime of Abbas, maybe the Palestinian will depart the status of a militia, a liberation organization towards statehood. And statehood means institutions, means accountability, means transparency, means democracy. Everybody is focusing on the necessity for the Palestinian state to be demilitarized, the D word. Well, this is short-sighted. It's not one D word. It should be 4 Ds. This state should be demilitarized, de-radicalized, developed, and democratic. These are the 4 pillars that will enable us to stay in a sustainable relation close to Israel. Because we cannot be underdeveloped state standing next an OECD country that is a startup nation. We cannot be a dictatorship that is integrated very much into a liberal democracy. So in a way or another, we need to create some kind of parities between these 2 states. And that's why democracy is one of the solutions, and it is very important. The Palestinians need to be sure that the only way they can entrust any leader or any political leadership is by election every 4 years. And I don't think that now it's important for us to try to look for names. I want to remind you that in 2021, when there was a proposed elections by Abbas, he canceled it 2 weeks before its date. 36 lists successfully were acknowledged to be participating in the elections. And these 36 lists, if you take out the Fatah and you take out the Hamas list, 34 lists are young Palestinian activists who managed in each list to bring 5,000 signatures and managed to raise up $10,000 and register the list. So there is generations of Palestinians who are waiting to be part of a political system that can integrate them and allow them to affect and impose their ideas and discuss and be, participant in the process of transformation. So it's not a savior, it's institutions. These elections will result in building our own institutions.
Maybe something, tell me, Samir, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not someone that has any expertise about the Palestinian society and, well, a little bit, but not like you. Just one thing that we need to say is that the Palestinian politics has been frozen for nearly 20 years from now. So what's needed, and as you say very, very clearly, it's not one new leader, but a mechanism that restore legitimacy through elections, renewal of institutions, credible local governance. So it's not a question of personalities. I'm sure there are many of them, but it's more about restoring accountability.
Yeah, exactly. Restoring accountability, transparency. Statehood are not built by recognitions from the others. They are built by practice, by building up institutions. If you would like to ask me who is coming, who should be coming to the Palestinian leadership, I will tell you, I would love to see a Palestinian Ben Gurion that is pragmatic, is pushing a state that did not hesitate to utilize the Altilena option when needed. So if we are thinking about how can we, deal with Hamas, we need a Palestinian Ben Gurion, and this guy can come through elections. If I ask you who is going to be, the coming Democratic candidate in the coming American elections, we don't know. Who is the Republican candidate in the coming elections? Nobody knows. But there will be primaries, there will be discussions in the parties, certain dynamics will raise up the coming leader. The same will happen with the Palestinians.
We have another question that I would like to ask all three of you for your input, and it says, why did Trump give that huge role to Turkey and Qatar and perhaps frustrated states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates? And what's the role of Egypt in that? Maybe I'd like to start with Rachel.
Sure. Are we discussing the role in the Gaza peace plan?
I would guess so, but I think that our
Yes,
audience
I guess.
member
Yes, I
Gudrun
guess
could
it is about.
The peace plan. Sure. Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Obvi it would sure it might frustrate Saudi Arabia and the UAE. I actually don't think it would. I don't think that Saudi Arabia and the UAE actually want more of a role in the Gaza peace plan. I think they're happy to stake their claim in Gaza reconstruction. Of course, seeing regional stability is extremely important to these actors, but they're already playing a role in reconstruction. They're providing a lot of the funds for this potential reconstruction. I don't think they're looking to play a bigger role than they already are. When it comes to Turkey and Qatar, these states have some kind of a relationship with the Palestinians and particularly with Hamas, right? Hamas has individuals in Qatar, and Turkey has played a role throughout the entire conflict, at least for the last 2 years. And Turkey is a major regional actor. If there was going to be a regional hegemon, it would definitely be Turkey. So it's important to include them here as well, given their influence as well, not just with Hamas and the Palestinians, but with neighboring countries like Jordan and Syria. So that would be my analysis on why Trump would give these bigger roles to Turkey and Qatar, and it's because they've already taken on these bigger roles. We know that Turkey has been massively involved in Syria, so we know that they are capable of taking on as big of a conflict as is going on in Gaza. But also with Qatar, I mean, they've helped with negotiations the entire time with Hamas, so it's kind of a natural pairing to have working on this Gaza peace plan, which we have yet to see if it comes to fruition, as opposed to states like Saudi Arabia, who still does not have a diplomatic relationship with Israel, so that is kind of a non-starter. And the UAE isn't necessarily, really fit for this kind of a job. So that's my analysis on that.
Thank you very
But
much,
if you may allow
Ilan.
me, if you
Yes,
may
Samer,
allow
go
me,
ahead.
I think it's this kind of structure is sending a wrong message to Hamas, because when Hamas sees that its main sponsors are leading the process, it gets confidence that they are still relevant and that they have a future. You cannot simply bring all the countries that are more tending to absorb Hamas and dealing with Hamas on the table and excluding all those who say clearly that there is no way that we can accept Hamas continuing any role in Gaza. So this is giving a wrong message to Hamas. Hamas now does not listen a lot to those who are telling, including the Americans will say it, there is no role for Hamas in the future of Gaza. For them, they are still wheeling and dealing. I think there is a critical strategic mistake that was taken there, maybe not out of intention, maybe out of goodwill, but it is a serious mistake.
Okay, we're slightly running out of time, but I have two questions. One is for Samer, so we'll continue because it's related to Hamas. It says, why do you think it's fair to ask for a demilitarized Gaza? Do you agree that if Hamas disarms, then Israel will continue to oppress Palestinians?
Well, I think, we need to decide, are we militias or state? So in statehood, there is only one arm. So we cannot continue, even if we still did not enter into a peace process officially that will lead to a Palestinian state. But we cannot continue in a situation where any Palestinian who can have access to any kind of arm can wake up in the morning and declare individually a war against Israel. Not any individual, not any group, not any militia. So there should be some kind of exclusivity in controlling the arms and exclusivity on the right to use violence. Okay, I can say maybe we, the Palestinians, have in certain moments the right to defend ourselves using some kind of defensive military operation, but it needs to be as a sovereign act, declaring it officially. But leaving this open for everybody to decide any moment to do anything that they are planning to do against Israel, I think this is a big mistake.
One last question for Ilan in this case. Could the success of the Abraham Accords be tied to Syria and Lebanon ultimately joining them, since President Trump has hinted to an expansion of the Accords, while the interim Syrian president has adopted a proactive stance towards Israel, and the Lebanese president a few days ago stated that there is a need for direct negotiations with Israel?
Well, very difficult question. Yes, we've seen that Syrian and as well Lebanon. I don't hear a lot about Lebanon, but Syria say that they are very interested by the logics of Abraham Accords. Now Syria is under progress, trying to create a new future for Syria and having a new regime. So. To me, it's just an idea of legitimacy, international legitimacy, and not more. So I will be very cautious and very careful on that, and I will not go further on this question because it's a very tough one, and I'm not a prophet.
Well, we've come to the end. 60 minutes seem very short when it's an interesting discussion. I want to ask you if there are some final thoughts, not final, but final for these 60 minutes, thoughts that you would maybe like to share. Ilan, starting with you, and then I'll ask Samer and Rachel.
Well, no. To me, we are in a crossroad. We know that for many years, the Israeli-Arab relations were the idea was to create a future for Palestinians. We changed with the Abraham Accords in 2020. We delete the question of Palestinians. I think that now we are in a momentum. In a momentum where we can decide to move forward and to stay in a transactional software, or finally to address the roots of the conflict. In the trust, in the dedication, in political courage, and it's difficult to find it both in Israeli side and in Palestinian side. But this is a momentum, and we need to take it right now.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, well, first I want to say thanks for having me, but speaking about any kind of expansion of the Abraham Accords, I think normalization will naturally come when Israel stops behaving destructively and harmfully in the region. That will naturally come when there are concrete improvements in Palestinian quality of life, liberty, representation, and they move towards sustainable peace. In practice, this has not happened, but normalization between countries, when Israel decides it is really willing to acknowledge there are Palestinians to begin with, acknowledge a Palestinian state, work towards any kind of peaceful environment in the West Bank, help with the reconstruction of Gaza, and actually acknowledge that a Palestinian state should and could exist, normalization with all of the rest of the region will come naturally. I think that having normalization come first before there's real concrete moves to actually address the Palestinian issue, they will always fall short. And they will not be treaties and normalization with integrity, and they will not be sustainable. So I think, not again, as I've said, normalization will naturally come when Israel actually acknowledges the Palestinian issue and actually works towards solving it.
Samer?
Well, I think we should look into some developments next week when the American administration will take this plan to the Security Council for a special resolution that will allow the presence of international forces in Gaza. And what the new player will be, introduced to the scene in Gaza. It's Indonesia. Indonesia is a country that has showed interest into putting a large number of soldiers on ground, boots on ground. So Indonesia is going to be a serious player, and nobody is taking it into calculations. It will integrate a lot of new horizons and a lot of new thinking about the Abrahamic Accords in connection with Gaza.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you, Rachel, Ilan, and Samer, for participating for a very rich and really nuanced conversation. A special thanks to Samer's cats and kittens in the background.
Yeah, she insisted to appear. I tried to push her back.
Very adorable. And a very big thank you to our audience, and thank you for the very interesting questions that you sent us. And here is where I say goodbye on behalf of all of us. So all the best to everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye. And Shabbat Shalom for those who are celebrating the Shabbat.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye-bye.
Great to meet all of you.